We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Today's reading, and for that matter, the next couple of days, is pretty short. Today it's just 3 verses. So what Paul is doing in these 3 verses is kicking off the argument, laying out the ground rules. And these ground rules are an examination of love and knowledge, and how knowledge, though necessary, can become dangerous if it is not offset, or at least if it is not mixed with love. So when I think about love and knowledge, I think about 2 sides of a single coin. I think about perfect balance. So here's what Paul says about knowledge. Knowledge is good. However, knowledge, and this is the Old King James, and here in the New King James, that language, knowledge puffs up. And what exactly does that mean? Well, knowledge without love is just simply self-aggrandizement. It is arrogance. It's almost like with education and knowledge comes an attachment, and that attachment is arrogance and pride. And so if you consider yourself a smart person, if you are educated with formal education, one of the things that you'll have to guard against is arrogance, where you feel superior to other people because you may have more education than them or because you have more knowledge than them. Well, what's the antidote to that? Paul says it's love. Well, what is love? Well, love is the nature within us that thinks about other people and how we may serve them and give to them and show respect and affection to them. You know, when you love your children, you want to show affection to them. You love your spouse, you want to show affection to them. It's a different kind of love, but you have a love for your brothers and sisters, and when you have that affection in your heart for them, you want to show them. Well, we might say that love without knowledge isn't everything that it can be because, well, you can love someone and maybe not know them, or you can love them and maybe not know what they like, or you could love them and maybe not have knowledge of how to show that, and, well, that love would be incomplete. But on the other hand, you could have knowledge, education, the ability to help people, but if you don't love them, you probably are not going to help them. So in the comparison, we would say that knowledge finds its purpose in love. So if you have knowledge and education, if you have experience that has built up knowledge, well, when you mix that with love and you love people, you're going to use that knowledge to serve people, and that's the antidote to using knowledge and education to only build yourself up and make you feel superior to other people. On the other hand, if you have a lot of love and affection, but you don't know what to do with it, maybe you need some knowledge. Maybe you need some knowledge about what people like, about how you can help them, about the resources that are available. A lot of times there are resources in the city, there are resources in the community, social resources. We love people and have a heart for them, but if we're ignorant of the resources available to help them, well, then our love really finds no purpose in itself, really, because it can't complete the mission. So, to carry us off, Paul did a good job, I think, putting together knowledge and love in balance, and then with those things, we can move forward in this chapter. Like yesterday, there are just 3 verses in today's reading. Now Paul introduces the subject, whereas yesterday he introduced a principle, that is the balance of knowledge and love. Now he introduces the issue. And the issue that he's going to deal with here is something that we really don't have an issue with in our culture, but we can understand it, and that is meat offered to idols. As we've said, Aphrodite is the patron goddess of Corinth, and in the worship of Aphrodite, as most other gods, there would be a required sacrifice. Now that sacrifice would be some form of animal. It could be sheep, goat, it could be a lamb, it could be bulls, oxen, whatever the people would bring. And well, a little part of that was cut off and burned in an offering to the goddess, but the rest of it was kept by the priests. Now, the priests would eat that meat, but also they would sell it. And so there were butchers that were associated with the temple that sold the leftover meat in the public square. Now, the Christians were having a hard time trying to discern and decipher whether or not it was proper to eat that meat. And I suppose if I was to lay out this scenario with a number of Christians, we might be divided also. You know, how many of us would really feel comfortable to know that the steak that we were eating or the hamburger that we were eating was actually taken from a sacrifice to some foreign god in someone's backyard? That they had first offered the food as a sacrifice and then they brought it in and put it on the table. Even if it wasn't meat, it could be green beans and corn for all we know. But it was offered just a few minutes before as a sacrifice to some demon god in the backyard. And we knew that. How many of us would sit down at that plate and not think a thing about it? Well, we probably would think something about that, and these people did too. So Paul has to address this. Now, it seems that Paul's personal conviction is that before that meat or that food was ever offered to a false god, it was the byproduct of Almighty God. It belonged to Yahweh before it was ever dedicated to some demon god or goddess. And so Paul would go back to its original life and say that life was given by Yahweh. And so personally, it appears as though Paul's conviction would be, it just doesn't matter. Don't ask any questions. Just eat, thank God for it, and move along. However, there was tradition in the church, even coming down from the Jerusalem Council, that Jewish and Gentile believers alike should refrain from eating meat offered to idols. And that's Paul's predicament. There's this tradition, there's this principle, that there is this rule that has come down from our church leadership that says, don't eat this. Paul, on the other hand, has a personal conviction that it's okay. Well, what do we do when those two things are in conflict? And that really is going to be the subject of the rest of this chapter. What do you do in situations where you have a personal conviction that is different than the people around you in your church, or that may even be different than the leaders in your church? What if there are some principles? What if there are some policies that you're not necessarily in agreement with? At what point do we push back? At what point do we just slam our fist on the table and say, I'm not going to do it, or I am going to do it? At what point do we just dig in our heels and say, no, enough is enough. I don't believe that, and I'm going to live my convictions the way I want to live my convictions. I don't care what you say or what you say. And well, I think that is where we have to default back to yesterday. Knowledge and love. Everybody has a little bit different level of knowledge. Some people have a knowledge of things that makes their conscience strong enough to not be pricked in the sense of doing one particular thing that another person may call a sin. So our knowledge is different, but our love, well, we need to be guided by love. So the bottom line, even though we'll say more about it tomorrow, is that we have personal convictions. We all are at different levels. We all have different beliefs and perspectives. There are many things in life that the Bible doesn't come outright and call it sin. But there's things in life that even though the Bible doesn't address, maybe my conscience bears witness with me that for me it's a sin. How do I live out my conscience if it's different than other people, especially if they have a problem with it and I don't? How am I supposed to interact with them? What if my leaders have policies that I don't agree with? I mean, these are good questions. And these are questions that people have on a daily basis. And these are very practical issues that we experience today. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But suffice it to say that our love works in conjunction with our knowledge. And the two have to operate together. We'll say more about that tomorrow. We conclude chapter 3 today using the principle that Paul laid out in the first 3 verses. And that principle is knowledge is absolutely necessary, needed, it's valuable. But there's an attachment to knowledge. When knowledge stands by itself, it has a tendency to produce arrogance and superiority. That's why the antidote to this arrogance and superiority is love. Knowledge finds its purpose in love. And that means that if a person has knowledge, whether it's through experience, whether it's through formal education or both, the purpose of that knowledge is not to make you look better. When you love people, you understand the purpose of that knowledge is for them, to serve them, to help them, to make their life better. Now, love doesn't stand by itself very easily without knowledge. In other words, you can love people, but if you don't have knowledge of the access that you have maybe to things that might help them, there are resources socially that can help these people. You may love them, but if you don't have knowledge of those resources, it's really hard to help them. And so you need some knowledge with your love. And when knowledge and love come together and work together, there's something beautiful that emerges. Now, Paul applies this into a setting in Corinth that's a little strange, but yet the principles are the same in any culture. And in Corinth, it was meat that had been originally offered to idols. And so there was, let's say that a bull was brought in, and they would cut part of the meat off. They would burn it as an offering to Aphrodite. Then they would sell the rest of that meat to the butchers wholesale, and they would sell it to the public. And the church members were having a hard time with the idea that the food that I'm eating had been offered to an idol. We talked about that yesterday. Paul comes along with some knowledge, and he says, here's the truth. Before that bull was ever offered to some fake god, even though there are many gods in this world, and we know that there are demon spirits in this world, but before that animal was ever offered to this demon spirit, God gave it life. The cattle belong to God on 1,000 hills. Everything belongs to God. The source of all life is God. So Paul is just saying, who cares? You're not going to get a demon because you eat a hamburger. Who cares? Don't worry about it. Don't even ask. Just enjoy your meal. That's knowledge. But Paul has also introduced love. And love says, even though I'm okay doing it, I don't think I'm going to do it in the presence of brothers and sisters or even in the public, since I know there's a lot of people that do have a question about this. And there's just a lot of issues in our life that we may do in private, things that we may have no problem with in our conscience. But instead of parading them out there like, hey, I've got the truth and I've got knowledge, I don't feel bad about it, I'm going to do it anyway. No, we do have the knowledge, but then we bring in our love. And love considers other people. Love considers the conscience of another person that may be hindered by something that you and I feel okay in doing ourselves, but it's questionable. And if it's questionable, I don't have to do it. A mature Christian limits themselves for the sake of others. That's called being a parent. That's called being mature. And in the body of Christ, we're all in this together, young and old, newbies off the street, dear old saints that have walked with God for years. And I think those who are mature, who truly understand what it means to be a spiritual mom or dad, understand that spirituality limits themselves for the sake of others. Because my knowledge is not about me. My knowledge was given to me to serve you. And as a servant, that's how we make disciples.